we go. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Sam Adams Lanham. I am the Community Engagement Librarian here in the Barrington area. So that means I work with and for our local nonprofits. With that in mind, I put on programs like to benefit them, like more about grant writing and other kinds of fundraising, board organization, things like that. And I get to work with organizations putting on programs such as this. So I'm really excited by the opportunity to work with Citizens for Conservation in their 50th anniversary year. And I'm going to let Peggy tell you just a little bit more about today's program. Peggy is a past president of Citizens for Conservation and is currently the chair of their Community Education Committee. So Peggy, if you would please.
Thank you, Sam. I am really pleased to be here with our speaker today. We are very, very happy to have this relationship with the Barrington Area Library to sponsor these programs. We usually do them live in the winter, and I think we're probably maybe the only benefit of the pandemic is that we didn't have to go out in the cold this morning and drive to get to hear this great program. So happy to have you all joining us. I also just want to let you know a little bit about Citizens for Conservation. We'll have an introductory slide showing this, but those of you who don't know us, we acquire and restore land, but we also help homeowners improve the habitat in their properties. And we have our program is called Habitat Corridors. You can find more information on our website at citizensforconservation.org, and then go under education and you'll see the link to Habitat Corridors. The goal is to get as much improved habitat in people's yards as possible, as Steve and Patty Barton have done, that you'll see in this great program this morning. Just one more announcement, if you will. We also have coming up in the spring our native plant sale, where you can get very reasonably priced native plants to help improve the property on your the habitat on your property. The pre-order will be starting on March 1st. It goes from March 1st till April 18th. So if you are interested in purchasing native plants for your property, pay attention. That's also going to have an announcement and so forth on our website. And as Sam mentioned, we have our March program coming up with this series with Andy Hay, who's going to be speaking about the stormwater management in the community. More information about that coming up on our website as well. So now I'm very pleased to introduce our speaker, Steve Barten. He's a veterinarian, a herpetologist, an award-winning photographer, as you will see, and experienced presenter at national veterinary conferences and veterinary schools. He and his wife, Patty, have been Barrington residents and CFC members for most of their adult lives. Steve generously donates his photography in support of CFC and other nonprofits across the US for use in publications, social media, and fundraising auctions. And in fact, he has done so. You will see we've created a 50th anniversary commemorative book, and we've highlighted some of Steve's wonderful photography in that as well. His talk today will highlight his photography and show the benefits of habitat restoration at a local level. So we are very pleased to offer this program today. I know you'll be delighted.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay. All right, how's everyone doing this morning? That's good to hear. Thanks for showing up on this first beautiful day in about 2 weeks that we've had. As they said, I'm a veterinarian, a herpetologist, a wildlife photographer. So this show is all about the animals. It's not going to talk very much about the actual restoration. And hopefully you saw Peggy Simonson's very excellent talk last month about 50 ways to improve the habitat in your yard. So we're going to talk about the wildlife in our yard, and I'm going to fire hose you with almost 70 species that we've documented with photos and videos in ours. It takes just a little over an hour to get through them all. All the photos were taken by me, all the videos by my trail cam, and all were taken in my yard with the exception of the beaver videos. If you like my wildlife photography, you can see more at stevebarten.com. And you can follow me on Instagram at Stephen_Barten. I do want to say that this is viewer discretion advised. I will show, forewarning you, a dead mouse, a small little picture. I will show you a dead squirrel that a red-tailed hawk has caught, but I promise there are no guts and no blood. I'm also going to show you some spider and snake photos, and it's my experience that people tend to not like animals with the wrong number of legs. Animals with 2 legs are pretty good, animals with 4 legs are pretty good, but animals with 8 legs or 0 legs, often people don't like them as much, but you're going to see some pictures today. So this whole talk started because I do a lot of wildlife photography, and I do a lot of it in my own yard, and I post it on social media on Facebook and Instagram, and I get a lot of comments like this. What are you, Dr. Doolittle or something? How do you get all this wildlife? Because I'm posting pictures almost every single day. And the answer is, not only have we restored the habitat to invite the wildlife, but I'm looking for it all the time. I'm looking out the windows all the time. I have my office set up on the 2nd story with windows that look out over the backyard and the woods behind the house. I have my camera ready to go, and if I notice any motion, I look up, and if it's something interesting, I'm ready to take pictures of it. I leave the screen off the window on the right so that I can photograph right through the glass. I got a trail cam about 3 years ago. It's motion activated. It shoots infrared at night. Trail cams are relatively inexpensive. You can get nice ones for around $100. You can get more features and more resolution for a little higher price, but certainly you don't have to spend any more than about $150 to get a really nice trail cam. The one I picked uses infrared to shoot it at night. And the reason I picked it was one of the reviews said he had purchased the camera to find out what animals were stealing the vegetables from his garden. And it turned out to be his neighbor and her daughter. So I figured if the humans can't see the infrared and notice it, then the wildlife won't be disturbed by it as well. Turns out coyotes and foxes absolutely see the infrared when it comes on, and it startles them, and they often change direction and head in the other way. Deer, on the other hand, are curious, and I'm not sure how much of it is that they're seeing the infrared light that comes on, or they notice that there's a camera on a stick next to their trail that wasn't there yesterday, but they always come over and sniff it and look right in the lens and check it out to see what's this new thing I'm looking at. So this is what you're going to see today. Really, virtually no word slides, maybe 2 word slides through the whole thing, one at the start, one at the end. But I'm going to show photos of the habitat. I'm going to show the various mammals. I'm going to show some of the insects that we see, some of the reptiles and amphibians, and I'm going to finish up with birds because that's what most people like the best. So we live in a community in the Barrington area, which is about 35 miles northwest of the city of Chicago, for those of you who are out of town. You think of Chicago as being all urban, but we're far enough out that we have trees and water. There's a lake in our community. And if I can highlight my laser pointer over here on the right, and we have this one big block on the west side that's got quite a lot of trees in it. And our house is on this southwest corner. There's a low area full of trees that the village owns, and it's low and wet, so it can't be built upon. We do have a little bit of lawn, we do have a little swimming pool, but the wildlife likes the woods. And I certainly recognize that if you want more wildlife in your yard, some people live in villages that don't have as many trees. And we may have certain species that like the trees more, that we may have different species than you'll see in villages. But every village has raccoons and opossums and red foxes and things like that. If you enhance the habitat, you will see more wildlife and more birds. So here's an aerial photograph taken in 1939 of our little community before it was built up. Here's our lake. Here's our wooded block in 1939. Here's our little wooded lot. And you can see back in 1939, the woods behind us was an open pond. So it's filled in with silt, and that's why it's low and wet. And boy, the dirt back there is just black and loamy and really good. When we moved in, it was solid buckthorn. You couldn't even see through it. In fact, the previous homeowner had cut a path through the buckthorn and made a clearing back in the woods and set up some chairs back there as a meditation area. The buckthorn was so thick, you could look back towards the house 50 feet away and not even be able to see it. So we've been clearing buckthorn. We've been in this house for 27 years. And first we cut the big buckthorns, then we cut the ones with 1 and 2 inch thick trunks, and then we started getting saplings. There were many years when Patty before work would go out and pluck exactly 100 buckthorn saplings out of the ground, roots and all, to keep on clearing the woods. It's taken years to get it clear, but you can see on the right, it's cleared out. And we've uncovered a lot of native trees, a lot of little sapling hickories and sapling oak trees that are growing up that had been choked out by the buckthorn. There are a few apple trees from back when farmers had planted apple orchards in this area. And you can see on the left over here how thick the buckthorn is in the village property that we haven't cleared yet. So opening it up makes it more readily accessible for the animals. Of course, all those dead trees are dropping branches, and we've created brush piles. We purposefully have decided to leave 4 brush piles as permanent features, as shelters for the wildlife, and various birds and animals will use those as shelters. We also leave log piles. We try to leave dead trees standing for woodpeckers, but sometimes they fall across a path and we cut them up, or sometimes they're too close to the house where they threaten damage to the house. And so those trees are cut down, but we leave the log piles as shelters. And then here's an opossum coming out of one of our brush piles at night. I knew he was there because I saw his footprints in the snow. So once it's all cleared out, sometimes invasive plants try to take over. This is sweet woodruff. When we first cleared it out, it spread from the garden and tried to grow in the woods. But since then, we found certain patches of native plants. We've been collecting seeds and spreading them. We've also been purchasing sedges and things at the CFC native plant sales and planting them all through the woods to try and return more native plants. So this is a patch of pen sedge that was present, and it's been spreading very nicely, and we've been spreading it around through the woods. We found a couple stands of Mayapples that were remnants in amongst the buckthorn. We've been digging up the rhizomes around the edges and starting new patches of Mayapples. Down here in the lower right, bloodroot. There was a few patches of those that were remnant. We've been spreading those, and you see we have some very healthy patches of bloodroot left. There are a few trillium and a few Dutchman's breeches.
Steve, I accidentally, there you go. Sorry,
Okay.
I accidentally muted you.
Got a warning. So the bloodroot and the Dutchman's breeches are native, and there are a few that are remnants, but boy, the deer like them. And if they don't have a screen over them, they get eaten pretty quickly. We have Virginia bluebells that Patty's done a good job of propagating and spreading, so we have more and more of those. We find occasional morel mushrooms. Very often they're near the apple trees, and there seems to be a symbiosis there. And we have one little patch of toothwort that somehow survived all the buckthorn. So how do you learn more about restoration? Through Citizens for Conservation is the answer at cfc.org. We recommend you join, but come to the work days. That's where you really learn. They have work days every Thursday and Saturday morning from 9 until 11. They're working right now. And working side by side with people who know what they're doing, you can learn how to identify buckthorn, how to identify other invasives like garlic mustard and Dame's rocket. You can learn the best ways to remove them and how to restore native plants, how to ID native plants, which native plants grow in what areas. And as Peggy mentioned, the native plant sales are a great place to get native plants for your yard. You can follow CFC on Facebook and also Instagram for more information on a daily basis. So getting back to the yard, we have a low area that's a vernal pool in front of the house. So it fills up with water in the spring, and the water is present all summer. It dries up in mid to late August. And because it dries up every fall, that means fish can't survive. So it's a great place for amphibians to breed. Toads and chorus frogs will breed in this every spring. But because it dries up, I wanted a water source for wildlife to drink from. And so I put this plastic pond in. It's about 5 feet long, about 2 feet deep. This is when I first put it in. I just dug a hole and stuck it in the ground. I don't have a pump or anything. I do clean it out every spring. This is non-native water hyacinth. I don't use that anymore. There's algae growing in it just over the years. It's built up, and I get duckweed from a local pond and put it in the top. And I put a few bait minnows every year to eat mosquito larvae. And I put some driftwood in there so that the frogs have a way to get in and out. I've planted sedges all around it and it's growing up nicely. Here you can see the sedges growing up. But the deer like to drink from it. The squirrels like to drink from it. The birds come and drink from it. The raccoons like it at night. Of course, raccoons like to fish in little ponds looking for crayfish and frogs. I'm not sure why this one got in and swam around this one particular night. But because the pond's 2 feet deep, the frogs can swim to the bottom to avoid the raccoons. Of course, you want a bird bath for your birds. All the birds use the bird bath. This is a Cooper's hawk. The crows, when we have whole nuts in our bird feeder, the crows will take a nut, fly to the bird bath, and dip it in the water before they eat it. I'm not sure why they do that, but it's interesting behavior. The birds, of course, poop in there and it gets a little scummy, so you want to clean it out with great regularity. We recommend using a heated bird bath in the wintertime. You plug it in, it prevents the water from freezing and allows the birds to have a source of water when it's cold out. So a couple of weeks ago when it hit 9 below zero, we have some yellow-rumped warblers that are overwintering here on the left. He came and took a drink. And then again, a couple of weeks ago, we had 9 inches of snow in one day. The bird bath stayed open. Here's a cardinal coming and taking a drink. There's a little bit of controversy with heated bird baths. There's a couple reports of birds actually immersing themselves and taking a bath and having ice form on their wings in really cold weather. That's a rare occurrence. And if you think about it, there are seeps and creeks throughout the area that are flowing. And because they flow constantly, they don't freeze completely. And so birds do have access to water and can make the choice to take a bath in this really frigid weather. They normally choose not to. It's like they know better, but occasionally they make a mistake. If you want to avoid that risk, you can put rocks in the bottom, enough so that the bird can take a drink, but not be able to immerse itself. We do provide bird feeders. We have them on poles that are about 6 feet high so that the deer can't reach them. We have these baffles that prevent the squirrels and raccoons from getting up there, and they're far enough away from the trees so that the squirrels can't jump across. The squirrels use the baffles as hides. When hawks come by hunting for squirrels, they run up inside the baffles to get away from the hawks. So now we have open area under the woods. The buckthorn is gone. We have shelter in the form of dead trees and brush piles. We have water features. There's native food for them to eat. And pretty soon they feel right at home. So here's our front yard looking back towards the house. And boy, we see deer every single day. And to show how much wildlife, here's one of my trail cam videos, all from one day. Here's 8:24, 10:27. 2 minutes later, a little fawn came across. 12:48, a doe came across. 2:21, the raccoons are back and they're horsing around. And then 4 o'clock, the raccoons are back and they're climbing the tree. That's all in one night. So we do get a lot of wildlife, and the trail cam lets me see what's going on at night when I'm not able to see them out the window. So we'll start with the deer. When we first moved in, we would occasionally see a buck with big antlers, and it was always a thrill. And as we cleared the buckthorn more and more, we'd start seeing them with great regularity. So now every fall, we during the rut, during the mating season, which is November, December into January, we usually see one really big buck with really big antlers. We usually see one buck that's just a little bit smaller, a third buck that's kind of a teenager, even smaller yet, and then 2 or 3 yearling bucks with just little spike antlers. So these are all pictures that are either taken through the window or from the front porch as they come through the yard. When they feel at home and they have open areas, they'll rest in the yard. The one on the upper left spent the night, and here he is waking up in the morning sunshine. The one on the upper right was taking a nap in the afternoon, and then there's one taking a nap during a snowstorm. We see the velvet bucks in the spring with the growing antlers, and fun to watch them as the weeks go by and the antlers get bigger and bigger. These guys wander quite a bit more than the does, so we don't see them quite as regularly, but every week or two, one will come through the yard. And we catch them on the trail cam. Here's one of the big boys. And we get some action. So here's some does, not quite ready for a boyfriend, but here's the buck chasing the doe, jumping over the log. I set the trail cam up on the log because very often wildlife, smaller wildlife runs up and down the log like a little highway. In the wintertime, the does gather together into herds from 6 to 12, and they often come through the yard in big numbers. So this is looking out my office window. And then you can see the footprints in the snow, just how many deer come through the yard on a regular basis. And so that's part of the arrangement we have with the deer. There's so many of them. The arrangement is if the deer don't eat the plants can grow in our yard. If the deer do eat the plants, they're not going to do so well. And you'll see published lists of plants that deer don't eat. And I'm here to tell you the deer do not read those lists. They often eat plants that are on those lists. If they choose to eat them, they're going to eat them. So all you can do is hope for the best. And we don't mind the deer so much, and so we put up with the damage. Here's a hydrangea next to our shed. It looks like a weed whacker's gone after it, and that's how it looks all summer long because the deer munch on it on an almost daily basis. And of course, the bucks do antler rubs to mark their territory. So they rub their antlers on the saplings and scrape the bark off, which will kill the small saplings. So as a result, we have wire cages around the little oak and hickory saplings that we want to make sure aren't damaged. And any new oaks or hickories that we plant, we always surround them with a little wire cage to protect them from the bucks. Here's a quick video to show just how quickly deer can do damage. Just a big mouthful of leaves gone in just 5 seconds. And if you think your plants high up are going to be safe, no, they stand on their hind legs and they can reach 6 feet up. We have leash laws in our neighborhood, and usually neighbors are pretty good about it, but a few neighbors are pretty lax about letting their dogs get loose. And the trail cam catches them chasing the deer through the woods. It's a little upsetting. I wish people would be a little more responsible. Of course, the cutest things are the fawns. And the thing about fawns is when they're first born, they're kind of spindly and weak. They can't walk long distances to keep up with the mom all day long. And so what the mom will do is she'll drop them off in a safe place for the day, and the fawn will curl up and sleep all day long. And then the mom will come back and get them at dusk. And very often people will find a fawn in their yard just curled up and alone, and they'll think, oh no, it's an orphan, it needs to be rescued. And it doesn't need to be rescued. This is normal deer biology. What it needs is to be left alone. So avoid the temptation to come too close to take pictures. You don't want to spook it where it gets up and runs because it's in a safe space right now. So stay away from it. Walk your dog on a leash. Keep your dog on the other side of the house. Pardon me. And the doe will come and get it that evening. So we find them curled up in the woods. We find them curled up in the lawn. One time we found it curled up next to the air conditioner. Pardon me. And here's a trail cam to show just how weak and wobbly these newborn fawns are. That guy couldn't be more than a day or two old. Usually the does have a single fawn and very cute. Sometimes they hang out with the mom during the day, but to see them in the yard walking around with their little white spots that help them blend in with the dappled sunlight under a tree. Of course, the spots fade as they get older. Very often they have twins, and usually we have 1 or 2 does with a single fawn, another doe with twins. And always fun to see the twins playing together or cavorting back and forth. And about 15% of the time, when there's adequate habitat and adequate food, white-tailed does will have triplets. And we see does with triplets almost every year, certainly every other year, sometimes 2 years in a row. In this case, I saw the triplets in the backyard working around the side of the house. I went out on the front porch and waited for them to come around the side of the house and got a nice picture. We catch them on the trail cam. Here comes the mom with the triplets. Cute little bunch as they run along together. And they come by during the day as well. And so again, we'll put up with the damage to our plants, the deer's, eating the plants all the time in our gardens because they are cute to see. Raccoons are very common. They live with people. They live under decks. They live under garages. We have some hollow trees in the yard that we think that they use. They tend to be more nocturnal. And so we don't tend to see them very often during the day, but we'll see them at dusk sometimes under the bird feeder. That's where this one was headed. We catch them on the trail cam more. So here comes a mother with 4 kits. They'll have 2 to 5 kits during the spring, and the babies will stay with the mother into late fall before they disperse as now grown adults. So there's a whole little family coming by. Raccoons are notorious for getting into bird feeders. And here we put out some sliced oranges and some grape jelly to attract the northern Orioles, the Baltimore Orioles. And we were finding the grape jelly on the ground every morning. And we figured it was probably raccoons going after it, but the trail cam is a good way to document exactly what's going on. The other really common mammal is the opossum. And I think opossums are really cute. I like them. This one's a little teenager. A lot of people don't like opossums. And I think that the naked rat-like tail is part of it. The fact that they will bare their teeth when they feel threatened, although they don't really lunge at you or bite. And they do have more teeth than any other mammal. They have 50 teeth, which is a lot more than most. The cool thing about their tail is it's prehensile. Small opossums can actually hang from a tree branch by their tail. The big ones are too heavy. But the great thing about opossums, and I learned this from my friend Jerry Reynolds, who hopefully is watching in North Carolina right now. He got a trail cam after he saw mine, and he set it up on a hole he found in the woods behind his house, and it turned out to be a possum den. And he documented possum behavior all year long. Several different females used it, several different males used it. They came and went. But one of the coolest videos he had was the possum was gathering leaves with its front feet, pushing it under its tummy to the back feet, using the back feet to push that wad of leaves to the tail. Then it curled its tail around the leaves, and then it walked into the hole, carrying that wad of leaves in its curled tail. And it was using the leaves to line its nest. So very interesting behavior in these little guys. They have cute little feet. Their front toes are kind of splayed, and their hind feet are unique in that their big toe sticks medially, almost like an opposable thumb. So they have unique footprints. And another good way to tell what kind of wildlife you have in your yard is to check the footprints in the snow. So you see the splayed toes on the front feet. You see here's the hind foot with the opposable thumb. So we know that an opossum has been by to visit last night. If they see you, they'll waddle away. But sometimes you'll see them up in the trees, sometimes eating berries, looking down at you. And they'll just sit there and look because they know they're safe up in the tree. We see them coming through in the snow. And here's a little teenager sitting on the log cleaning himself. They're clean little creatures, even though they have a rat-like tail. Skunks, of course, people don't like skunks because they can spray. Their spray can go up to 10 feet, and it can be smelled as far as 3.5 miles away. But they don't want to spray. They only use the spray in self-defense, and if you leave them alone, they will leave you alone. In this case, Patty's mom was over having dinner with us, and she looked over my shoulder through the window behind me and said, "What are all those black and white kitties on the deck behind you?" And it was a mother skunk with 4 babies coming out from under our deck. We had no idea she was there. It's not like she was spraying every day. We never noticed any skunk smell. And of course, you don't want your dog to get skunked. Walk your dog on a leash at night, and then it will never get skunked. It's when you turn your dog out unsupervised that it's going to run into a skunk and run into trouble. They like the little pond in front. They're out in the wintertime. One of the cool things about skunks is they will dig up yellow jacket nests in the ground and eat the honeycomb. Their thick fur protects them a little bit from the stings. If you have grubs in your lawn, they will dig up the grubs. So if you find little holes 1 inch to 2 in diameter all over your lawn, you probably have a grub problem, and it probably was skunks digging up those grubs. Related to the skunks are the weasels. This is a long-tailed weasel. They're nocturnal. They're fairly common in our area, but you almost never see them because they're so secretive. And one year I was having a mouse problem getting into my shed. And so I was setting have-a-heart traps to trap the mice and relocate them. And one night I caught a long-tailed weasel in the trap and was able to get an actual photo of them. They're 12 to 20 inches long. They're kind of like 2 chipmunk size end to end. They're long and thin and very agile. And every once in a while I get them on the trail cam, but they're super fast. Look how he leaps about. So I slow the video down so you can see how far they jump and just how agile they are. So he's kind of light colored with a dark tail tip, very thin. About an hour later, he came back, went the other way. And again, Oops. Sorry, let's try this again. Trouble with my buttons. They're slowing it down. Looks like a long streak. Here he comes. Boing, boing. Very agile. These guys are terrific predators. They eat small mammals and they will catch things bigger than they are. The other member of the mustelid family is the mink. The mink are bigger than long-tailed weasels. They're 20 to 24 inches. They're darker in color. They're semi-aquatic, so they live more near the lake. They don't come up, we're 2 blocks from the lake, and they don't come up this far very often. They have more of a loping gait. They're not quite as athletic. And here's one during the day. But we occasionally see mink. Some people think that the mink around here originated as escapees from mink farms, which used to be common around here. But in fact, mink are native in Illinois, and they're found in every county in Illinois. We had a beaver in our yard one time. And of course, beavers live in the lake, and we're 2 blocks from the lake, so it's uncommon for them to come up this far. And one time when my son Keith was still at home, he came in and said, "Dad, there's a beaver in the front yard chewing on one of the oak trees." And of course, knowing animal expert Dad said, "Oh, Keith, we're too far from the lake. It's probably a woodchuck." And he gave me that teenager eye roll that only teenagers can do when their parents are being dumb. And we went outside, and sure enough, it was a beaver with a flat tail chewing on the tree. And it was pre-digital camera, so I don't have any photos of it. And these videos are from Citizens for Conservation Property. The restoration manager told me where Beaver Dam and Beaver Lodge was on the property. And I brought my trail cam over there and set it up and caught this beaver chewing down a tree. And then I set it up on the lodge, and we got 120 videos in one night of the beavers working on the lodge. They carry mud in their front feet and walk on their hind feet, and they carry grass and they drag sticks up there, and they work and work and work to build up the lodge in the fall. You can see this was in November. Anyhow, getting back to my beaver, it was a really hot day. It was like 95 degrees, and normally the beaver would have run away from me, and he really didn't. He walked very slowly. And so what I did was I got an empty garbage can and put it over the top of him and slid the lid under it. Now I had a beaver in a garbage can. And we drove him down to the fen behind the lake in our neighborhood and turned over the garbage can. He ran down into the creek, and you could just see him go, ah, as he hit the cool water on that hot, hot day. We see a lot of coyotes, and boy, people are afraid of coyotes. Neighborhood people often send out warnings when they see them, and they tell me, gosh, it was bigger than a German Shepherd. But notice there's never anything of size reference around the coyote. They're just off in the woods and you can't tell. But coyotes average only 35 to 45 pounds, with occasional individuals getting up to 55 pounds. And German Shepherds are 75 to 95 pounds, so they're really not as big as a German Shepherd. Other neighbors tell me, oh, it looks like a coy wolf. And they've heard coy wolf in newspapers and on TV shows. And coy wolf sounds like it's more aggressive and more dangerous, and it certainly makes for a bigger story if you had a coy wolf in your yard compared to a coyote in your yard. But coy wolf is really not an accurate thing. The eastern coyotes that live in New England and Canada north of New England and along the Atlantic seaboard, research has shown that they do have a little bit of coyote DNA and a little bit of dog DNA in their genome. But they're still 60 to 80% coyote, only 8 to 25% wolf, and only 8 to 11% dog. The point is the hybridization that allowed that DNA to enter the genome occurred in the early 1900s, which means the coyotes today are the same coyotes that were present 100 years ago. There's no evidence that they're currently hybridizing or changing, and there's no evidence that they're bigger or stronger or more dangerous. The eastern coyotes are about 5 pounds heavier on average compared to the western coyotes that we have here in the Midwest. But to call them a coyote, to call them a coy wolf, it's all the same animal that it's been for the last 100 years. It's nothing new or different. And coyotes certainly do deserve your respect. They are active during all times of the day. Here's a pair of them at 9:30 in the morning. Here's one at 4 in the afternoon, jumped up on the log and watched the cars drive by. Here's one in the snow at 12:40 in the afternoon. Here's one at 6 in the evening doing a pirouette. And notice this is October 20th. And 5 days later on the very same log, here's a neighbor's cat. So coyotes absolutely will eat cats and small dogs. One study showed that in urban areas, up to 20% of the coyote's diet was cats. And in suburban areas, it was less, but still 4% of their diet was cats. So they do take a lot of cats. And I have one friend who got home, was unloading her car in the evening. Her little dog was running around. It ran about 30 feet away from where she was standing, and a coyote jumped out from behind a tree and grabbed her dog. And she yelled and made the coyote drop it and got it back, and it needed surgery and it got better. But the point is, they absolutely will go after small dogs and cats. So to avoid this, you really should keep your cats indoors. We saw this cat on a very regular basis throughout November and most of December, but I haven't seen it since late December. And I don't know if that means that the owner started keeping it indoors. I don't know who owns this cat or if something happened to it. And obviously there's risk from cars as well. There's risk from great horned owls. We've had 2 clients this year who were walking their dogs on a leash, their little dogs at night, and were attacked by great horned owls. So to keep your animals safe, if you have small dogs, walk them on a leash and be right next to when you're outside, and the coyotes aren't going to like people, aren't going to come and bother it. And keep your cats indoors, it'll be much safer. Probably my favorite mammal is the red fox. I think it's the prettiest with its bright red coat, its luxurious tail, and those contrasting black legs. They come through the yard every once in a while. I think they're hunting squirrels and chipmunks. They certainly eat a lot of mice and voles and things like that. And I don't know if you can tell on this resolution, but the odd thing about red foxes is they have vertical pupils like cats. And we tend to think of vertical pupils as being a cat thing and round pupils as being a dog thing. And certainly foxes are members of the canine family. But it turns out that vertical pupils are a small predator thing and round pupils are a large predator thing. So the vertical pupils help these small predators gauge the distance of their prey so they can pounce with more accuracy. So foxes and cats have vertical pupils and dogs have round pupils. But other large predators, if you think about it, lions and tigers and jaguars have round pupils, and they're members of the cat family. So think of vertical pupils as a small predator thing, not a cat thing. The other really interesting thing about foxes is when they pounce on their prey, the majority of the time they use the Earth's magnetic field to help gauge how far away the prey is. And they jump in a north direction most of the time, sometimes in the south direction, actually just a few degrees to the east of true magnetic north. When they jump in that north direction, they have 73% success when they pounce on their prey. When they jump in the south direction, they have 60% success. Any other direction, they only have 18% success. So it's a useful technique for them. We catch them on the trail cams, and again, they just, such luxurious coats. They're just so pretty. And they have that loping gait that's a little different than a dog or a cat as he goes off through the woods. This one was just in December on the tree trunk. They often use the tree trunks like little highways. It's almost like they're feeling that the forest floor is lava and they don't want to touch it. Squirrels are common. We have gray squirrels up in our neck of the woods. Down in the village of Barrington, it's mostly fox squirrels. So the gray squirrels tend to be gray with a little brownish color around their cheek and chin, and they live in tree hollows. We have a lot of melanistic squirrels. So these are still gray squirrels, but they just have more pigment. And so they'll be jet black, like up here and in the middle on the bottom. Some of them are jet black with a white tail tip. And one time we had one that was black with a red tail. It was really pretty. This one in the upper left is certainly a darker color than normal gray squirrels, but it's not quite jet black. And this one on the lower right is a fox squirrel, just to show the difference. They're redder and they're bigger, but the gray squirrels are more aggressive and tend to push the fox squirrels out. Here's one that a lot of people don't know that we have, but are very common in the Barrington area, the southern flying squirrel. And flying squirrels have a fold of skin between their front legs and their hind legs, and they can leap into the air and stretch their legs out in an X pattern. And that fold of skin works like a parachute so that they can glide. Their tail is kind of flat from top to bottom. It works like a rudder, and they're nocturnal, so they have great big eyes. They like big patches of woods because they rely on tree hollows to live in. This one found one of our wren houses, and we knew it was there because you can see the rodent gnawing marks around the opening. So I came out with my camera ready and I knocked on it like knocking on a door with my knuckles. The little flying squirrel ran out onto the top. I snapped a picture and he quickly ran back in again. We catch them on the trail cam every once in a while. This is a really cool video. The deer was walking by and triggered the trail cam, and some UFO goes shooting by in white. And if we slow it down, the deer triggers the trail cam, but here comes a flying squirrel gliding through the air just by happenstance. Pretty cool. And we catch him on the log as well. So he's got great big eyes. See the fold of skin between his front legs and his hind legs? And the flattened tail. There's the fold of skin. Very agile little guys. They jump and glide, and strictly nocturnal, but very common in the Barrington area. So here, sorry, is the dead mouse. Sadly, one time I found this mouse that had fallen into our pool and drowned. And when I pulled it out, I noticed it looked very different from the typical mice we see. And we have deer mice, we have house mice, we have meadow voles, we have short-tailed shrews. But look how long, ridiculously long his hind feet are and how long his tail is. He looks like a kangaroo. And this is a meadow jumping mouse, which is fairly common in the area, but rarely seen. Again, often nocturnal. This is another exception. I took these pictures of the live jumping mice in a restored prairie just over the border in Wisconsin. See how the back of the mouse is dark brown and the sides are kind of golden colored? And that's characteristic of the meadow jumping mouse. And here he is sticking his head out of a tuft of grass. But they go leaping through the prairie, and they're difficult to get photos of because they're really quick and they leap. But again, something many people have never heard of. So we catch mice on the trail cam. This one had a particularly long tail, and I sent the video to a biologist friend and asked if he could tell what species of mouse it was. And without prompting him that I've seen a meadow jumping mouse in our yard, he said, you know, that might be a jumping mouse. Moving on to insects. If you plant the native plants, of course, the pollinators will come, and it's fun to see the bumblebees and the honeybees. I've not seen the endangered rusty patched bumblebee in my yard yet, and there are many species of bumblebee, and it can be tricky to tell which one is which. But here we have a coneflower, we have some goldenrod, we have an aster, and that might be a cultivar aster. Peggy might know better than I do, but the pollinators certainly like it. And we also get a lot of honeybees. Here's a honeybee on our native spider board. And certainly this globe flower is not a native plant, but boy, the pollinators love it. And very often we get multiple species on the same flower at the same time. So here we have a silver spotted skipper butterfly, a grass carrying wasp, and a honeybee all at the same time. So what I like to do is I'll notice the bumblebees, I'll notice the honeybees, I'll look for the ones that look different. And anything that looks different, that's what I'll focus on and take photos of and try and figure out what species that is. So here's a big black wasp about 1.5 inches long. It has a very narrow waist. When I look it up, it turns out to be a grass carrying wasp. And it turns out, you know, when I think back, we have a bay window looking over our flower garden. And when we open that window, sometimes in the summer, we found dead grass packed into the crevice between the window and the sill on the horizontal and the vertical aspects. And we found little paralyzed small katydids tucked in amongst the grass. And it turns out that's the nesting strategy for the grass carrying wasp. He tucks dead grass into the crevices. He paralyzes the insects with his sting, and then lays an egg, or the female lays an egg on the paralyzed insect, and then the growing larvae feeds on that insect as it develops. This other black wasp, notice how it has a little white on the nape of its neck and on the front part of its abdomen. So that's a different kind of wasp there. And the side screen that shows the people is covering it. we go. Another wasp that looked different was this great golden digger wasp. It's kind of orange in color with a black abdomen tip. It's also about 1.5 inches long. And this is another species that digs tunnels underground and will paralyze insects with its sting, and then lay its egg on top of that paralyzed insect, and the larvae will eat that insect during development. The great black wasp is not quite as big as the grass-carrying wasp, but it's black with beautiful metallic blue wings. The biggest wasp is the Cicada Killer. And one summer we found these hovering over the lawn about shoulder height, flying back and forth, and like a drone almost. And what they're doing is hunting cicadas, which they paralyze with their sting. We followed them, and we had a raised area in the garden with some bricks, and it had dug a tunnel between the bricks. And here it had 2 paralyzed cicadas. And again, it drags them underground and lays the egg on top of the paralyzed cicada, and the larvae feeds on the cicada as it develops. They're 2 inches long, but they're not aggressive at all. They're not going to attack you or sting you. Some other ones. So this is garlic mustard, which we have a lot of in the garden. It's not a native plant, but boy, the pollinators love it. So many bees hover over it. These are little metallic green bees or metallic sweat bees. They're 1/4 inch long and bright metallic green. And then this longhorned bee here is about half the size of a honeybee. It has bright yellow legs and very long antenna. Of course, we have wasps, and the yellow jackets come to the flowers and gather pollen as well. But on the right here, we have a hover bee, and it's a bee mimic. And see, it's black and yellow like a bee. It looks like a bee. You think it's a bee, and I think predators leave it alone thinking that it might be a bee. But I show the wasp in comparison, and notice that the hoverfly has a fly-shaped head, not a wasp-shaped head. Notice how its wings go back at a 45-degree angle like a fly. They're not long and narrow like the wasp, so it's a mimic. We get these bald-faced hornets. They usually build their big paper nests high up in the trees, 20 or 30 feet up, and we don't notice them until the leaves fall down in the fall. But this one was built in the flowering crab right next to our driveway, and so we were able to watch it all summer long. They build a great big nest. If you leave them alone, they'll leave you alone. If you see them around the garden, they'll leave you alone. But if you disturb their nest, they will defend it vigorously, and they will attack you in a swarm. So you definitely want to leave the nest alone. But if you have a telephoto lens, you can back up about 6 feet and take some nice pictures of them coming and going through the little hole in their paper nest. We get a lot of other pollinators, a couple kinds of skippers, little small butterflies, the fire skipper and the other one. We got Luna moths one time, landed on the side of the garage and were mating. So one pair was mating, and then a third one, which certainly was a male, that was attracted to the pheromones secreted by the female. So Luna moths are very, very large, and they have these long projections on the caudal wings. And the interesting thing about, you wonder, why do these moths have these long projections and other moths don't? It turns out it's a bat deterrent. So obviously moths are nocturnal, and bats will sometimes prey on Luna moths. And as the moth is flying along, that trailing edge of the caudal wing flutters, and it confuses the sonar of the bat, so the bat has a harder time catching them. And they know this because they did an experiment where they put Luna moths in a room with bats. Some of them they left intact, some of them they trimmed just that long trailing part of the wing off. And the bats were able to catch the ones where the wings had been trimmed much more easily compared to the ones that had intact wings. We have Sphinx moths, which are also known as hawk moths or hummingbird moths. And these are moths that have a very long proboscis, and they hover in front of a flower like a hummingbird and drink the nectar. So clearly this is a non-native petunia that was in a pot next to our pool. And the hummingbird moths, the Sphinx moths, would come and drink the nectar from those flowers. I took this picture through the window. Another kind is the snowberry clearwing. It's also a Sphinx moth. This one was resting on a plant in the early morning, and I got its picture before it flew away. But here's one hovering in front of a monarda, and this is a cultivar monarda. The native monardas are more of a pale pink, but it was collecting nectar with its long proboscis and hovering. And again, it's a bumblebee mimic with a black and yellow. And of course, the poster child for butterflies that come back when you plant native plants is the monarch butterfly. And monarchs, of course, specialize in milkweed plants. And we didn't have any milkweeds when we moved in, but we've been planting them the whole time. And so we have more and more all the time. And just this past summer, for the first time, we noticed one milkweed right next to our garage had a lot of chewed up places. We looked carefully, and there were 3 monarch caterpillars on it eating the leaves. And we followed them throughout the next few weeks, and they did form a chrysalis, which is a cocoon. And boy, we knew where the chrysalises were, but when we went the next day to find them, boy, they were hard to find. They really blended in perfectly with the green of the leaves. And after about 3 weeks, they turned clear, and you could see the developed butterfly inside ready to hatch. And I went to work at 8:30 in the morning, and the chrysalises were clear. I got home at 1 o'clock, and they had already hatched out. Another cool little bug is the assassin bug. And these are bugs, they sit on flowers that pollinators come to. They have those praying mantis-like pinching front legs that they're able to capture pollinators, bees and things that come to the flowers. And then they have a long piercing mouth part that they're able to kill and subdue the bee with, and then suck its inner juices. They're only 1/4 of an inch long. They're really tiny. And they usually live on yellow colored flowers. And again, these are the non-native garlic mustards, but so many pollinators come to them that the assassin bugs were using them this time. Here they are on goldenrod. And if you're walking through a big field of goldenrod and you want to see some assassin bugs, look for a dead bee in the flower. If you see a dead bee, there's usually a very well camouflaged assassin bug holding onto it. So here's the dead bee. Here's one assassin bug holding it. Here's another assassin bug trying to mate with it. Here's another dead bee, and here's the assassin bug up here holding on to it. Very well camouflaged. And of course, we have praying mantises. So the native North American praying mantis, I'm not sure, but I don't think gets quite this far north normally. And they're much smaller. They're only about 2 to 2.5 inches long. But garden centers have been importing praying mantis egg cases for many years and selling them as native pest control. And so people put these egg cases in their gardens and they hatch out. And now we have established populations of European mantises. And these, you can tell them by inside their front legs, they've got a black spot with a white center that's very distinctive, looks like a little bullseye. These guys are bigger than the Carolina mantises. They get up around 4 inches long. And then we also have the Chinese mantis, which is even bigger. They can get to be 5 inches long, and they lack that black and white spot inside their front legs. So they're not native species, but they do prey on garden pests. And here's one of those 8-legged things that some people don't like. The black and yellow garden spider, or Argiope, or Argiope, I've heard it said both ways. Some people call them the zipper or zigzag spider because in their webs, they have this white marking in the middle, zigzag, and they'll sit in the middle of the web and wait for insects to land in the web, and then they will envelop them with silk. So the females are big and robust. The males over here on the right are much skinnier. Here's one eating a leaf. So a lot of people don't like spiders, but I think they're a signal that you have a really healthy ecosystem, that you're not overusing insecticides. They're very common on the restored prairies on CFC property. Moving on to amphibians and reptiles. By far the most common amphibian that we see are American toads. So American toads have these little warts on their back. They're not really warts, they're skin glands. And they do secrete a little poison from these big ones, the parotid glands behind their eyes. If a dog or a cat picks one up, it will foam at the mouth, but it's not strong enough to kill a dog or a cat, not like some of the tropical toads that you find down in Florida. We find them in the grass, we find them in the woods, they get into the pool. I do check the pool every morning to rescue any toads that have fallen in overnight. We do have a little gizmo that hopefully the toads can use to climb out on their own. But they use our vernal pool in front of the house to breed in the spring. And they call and they trill all night long. And you can tell what species of frog it is by the sound of their song, just like you can tell what species of bird it is, because each song is different and unique. The other common amphibian that uses our pond to breed is the chorus frog. These guys are only about 1 inch long. They're light brown. They have 3 longitudinal dark stripes on their back and a darker eye stripe. Their call sounds like if you run your finger down the teeth of a plastic comb, a series of plinks all in a row. They also use the ditches next to the road and any small body of water that doesn't have fish. They call from mid-March until the middle of the summer. Very common throughout the Barrington area. We see gray tree frogs. Tree frogs have those sticky toe pads and they climb on things. They're not very common in our area, but we see them in our yard every once in a while, and we see them on CFC property. They tend to be light green. They can turn color. They can change to light gray. They can be plain with no blotches, or they can change their color and have light green blotches or dark green blotches or dark gray blotches. And they change according to mood and temperature and humidity. Here's one that's a little more gray with some faint blotches. Here's a little newly transformed one that used our front pond one year, transformed from a tadpole. Green frogs are one of the most common frogs. It's a true frog. A lot of people confuse these with bullfrogs. They're kind of plain greenish brown. The males often have light green on their upper lip, but that's not a diagnostic feature. The thing about green frogs is they have this fold of skin that runs from their eye 3/4 of the way back towards their hip. It's called a dorsolateral fold on each side. You see the fold of skin here. So these are very common frogs. They live in my plastic pond every summer, and we see them in the pools every once in a while. Bullfrogs are a little different. They're bigger. They don't have that fold. The fold wraps around their eardrum and stops. It does not extend towards the hip. They tend to live in our lake, and they like bigger bodies of water. But during rainstorms, they'll travel long distances, so they end up in our yard every once in a while. We found this one in our pond one summer. This is the tympanic membrane or eardrum. In a male green frog or bullfrog, in the male, the tympanic membrane is a larger diameter than the eye. In the female, the diameter of the eye and the tympanic membrane are about equal. So you can tell what sex it is by looking at its head. We get leopard frogs, northern leopard frogs, which have leopard-like spots. These are grassland frogs. So they like to live in the restored prairies on CFC property. We see them in our lawn and they get into our pool every once in a while, but we don't see them in the woods. We have two species of salamander. When I was growing up in Barrington in the 1960s and 70s, tiger salamanders on the left were ubiquitous. They were everywhere. They were in everyone's window wells. They were in ponds and things. They do spend most of the year underground, but they get up and move to breeding ponds in the spring. They're 6 to 8 inches long, but they can get to be a foot long. They're black with irregular yellow spots. The other kind of mole salamander that spends a lot of time underground is the blue spotted salamander. I've seen one in my yard once in the 27 years that we live here. They're very secretive. They're probably still here, but their numbers certainly are declining as we build more subdivisions and destroy their breeding ponds and use more insecticides. But they're black with these light blue spots. They're very, very pretty. There's still a thriving population in North Barrington that I know of. Again, we're 2 blocks from the lake, so we don't get a lot of turtles, but sometimes the female turtles wander long distances looking for a place to lay their eggs. So every once in a while, we see a painted turtle. This one was in our driveway one summer. Snapping turtles go farther, and we have a lot of snapping turtles in our lake. And neighbors always call me up and they're all disturbed, you know, oh, it's a snapping turtle, I'm afraid of it. But think about it, it's a turtle. What's it going to do? Chase you? You know, you're faster than a turtle. If you take 2 steps back, you're safe. So the point is, the turtle's just up looking for a place to lay its eggs, or it's moving looking for a mate in a different pond nearby or something. The point is, just leave it alone. Just go away. Work on the other side of your house. Keep your dog on a leash. Walk your dog on the other side of the house, and in a few hours, it's going to be gone. So don't worry about it. You don't have to move it. You don't have to relocate it. And again, it's just a turtle. It's not really a danger. We have a few snakes in the Barrington area. And if you remember one thing from my talk today, remember this: there are no venomous snakes in the Barrington area. There are no rattlesnakes here. There are no copperheads here. There are no cottonmouths here. If you find a snake, it's a harmless snake. Please don't kill it. Garter snakes are the most common. They're black or dark green, and they have longitudinal yellow stripes running the length of their body, one down the midline and one on each side. We have fox snakes. In my neighborhood, these are pretty common. They live in the fen and the cattails during the summer, and they come to high ground to hibernate. They are common here and there throughout the Barrington area, but not everywhere, and certainly not in the village. They get to be about 4 feet long. They're great rodent eaters, but they have a habit that does them in. Look at its tail right here. It comes to a nice sharp point, but they rattle their tail when they're frightened. They're not rattlesnakes. It does make a noise when it's in dry grass or dry leaves. People see that vibrating tail and think, oh, it's a rattlesnake, and they kill it. But it's harmless. Many fox snakes have a paler colored head than the rest of the body. And people think they're copperheads, but they're not. Here's a younger one with a brighter pattern. These guys are kind of dull. We have milk snakes. They're not common in the Barrington area. I'd never seen one until my neighbor sent a photo in of a snake asking what it was. Didn't know she was my neighbor, but turned out she lives a block from me. I've been here 25 years, never seen a milk snake, and she has a population in her yard, a fairly small population. They're members of the king snake family. They tend to be shinier. They're blotched. They look kind of like the fox snake, but their bodies aren't so heavy bodied. They also have a sharp tail with no rattle. They also rattle their tails when they're upset. They're harmless. They're not rattlesnakes. Please don't kill them. They do eat other snakes. The young tend to have brighter red colors. They tend to be shiny. Look how the light reflects off of them compared to the fox snake. And they turn from more red to more brown as they get bigger. So my neighbor has a lot of snakes in her yard, and they were getting into her crawl space, and she was finding them in the wintertime when it was too cold for them to be released outside. And she knew that I had pet snakes because I'm a herpetologist and I like snakes and I hibernate my snakes. So she brought them to me to take care of. I set them up in cages in my heated garage and kept them all winter until we could release them in the spring. But this shows the differences. So here's a garter snake with a yellow stripe and a dark background. Here's a garter snake with a yellow stripe and kind of a checkered background, which we see in some individuals. These little tiny reddish ones are newly hatched milk snakes, probably hatched inside her basement somewhere. This one is a fox snake, a small one. Here's a fox snake that's at least a year older, and here's some bigger milk snakes here. Moving on to birds, and we're going to finish up with birds, and these are people's favorites. If you put out bird feeders, you're going to get the migrating birds come through that everyone likes. And boy, in the spring, there's some really vibrant and beautiful ones. The rose-breasted grosbeak is one of my favorites. The male is so brightly colored and the female is more dull. But notice her size and shape is the same. Her beak shape is the same. We get the Baltimore Orioles. If you put out orange slices and grape jelly, they like those. And of course, the indigo buntings are just beautiful. But if you have habitat, if you have native plants, and again, virtually every bird species eats some kind of insect during its lifetime, and they eat native insects. And of course, your lawn grass doesn't support any insects. Your flower garden plants don't support the native insects. You're not going to get the native birds as much. But if you plant native plants, you'll get more and more. So these species forage in trees and shrubs. They forage on the ground. This is a ruby-crowned kinglet, a little tiny bird that eats mostly insects. Here's the American tree sparrow with a dark spot on the front and the bicolored bill, dark on top, light on the bottom. Here's a fox sparrow that's bigger than most sparrows and it's mostly gray and brown with very little black. Here's a white-throated sparrow. These guys don't tend to come to your bird feeders. We planted a big serviceberry bush in our yard, and some of the birds really like the berries. It's a great source of flowers and beauty in the spring, but the berries are great food. The cedar waxwings are berry specialists, and they come in great numbers to eat the berries as they ripen, but other species of birds come after the berries as well, the robins and the blue jays. We even have chipmunks running up and down the branches eating berries during the fall. Bluebirds, of course, like more open areas than our thick woods, but wandering through the woods with my camera looking for warblers one spring, I saw a flash of blue, and there was a bluebird just checking us out and passing through, and I was able to get some nice pictures. This is a red-bellied woodpecker, a very common woodpecker in yards. It has red on the crown of its head, but notice no red on the cheeks and no red on the chin. A lot of people think it's a red-headed woodpecker because there's red on its head, but I'll show you a red-headed woodpecker in a minute. It has this rosy blush on its tummy, and that's why they call it a red-bellied woodpecker. It has a unique call. They love suet. They love to come to your bird feeder. And again, here's why we leave dead trees up whenever we can, because they will dig holes and use the trees for nest cavities. Here's a dead box elder tree. I was walking through the woods and I heard chirping noises. And I looked up and this little fledgling downy woodpecker was sticking his head out of the hole. So I took advantage of it and I got my camera on a tripod and I set up. And every 20 minutes, the mother came by with a big juicy caterpillar to feed her baby. So the downy woodpeckers are small and they have a little tiny beak. The hairy woodpeckers are black and white and look almost identical, but they're larger and they have a longer beak. So here's the hairy woodpecker. See how the length of his beak is about the same as the length of his head. In the downy woodpecker, it's about half that size. Here's one where, again, a dead box elder tree. As I walked by, I heard a drumming coming from inside the tree, like a knock, 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 knock. And every once in a while, he'd stick his head out and spit out a mouthful of shavings, and he was enlarging his little nest hole in that tree. Here's the true red-headed woodpecker. The entire head is red. And these are probably one of my favorite birds to see in the yard, but they don't stay long. They like big stands of dead trees. And we don't have enough dead trees to keep them around, but they will show up in the spring and in the fall every once in a while. They are in our area. They used to be really common in the 60s and 70s. Their numbers have dropped off, but they're starting to come back. Turkeys are very common in Wisconsin and up around Woodstock. They're starting to move southeast into our area. I see them now and again in the Barrington area. I don't see them every month or every year, but we have seen turkeys in our yard. You can see we did a little prescribed burn here of some of the native plants, and the turkey showed up scrounging for spent seeds that the birds had spilled on the ground under our feeders. Then a few weeks later, when the plants were starting to grow up, I noticed the turkey out there and I was taking his picture and he kept jumping up in the air like this. And I couldn't figure out what was going on, but there was a squirrel on the ground that was attacking the turkey and trying to make him leave so he could have all of the seeds for himself. But the turkey was too strong, he never left. For a long time, we had a wood duck box nailed to a dead tree, but the tree finally fell over and we lost that box. And we found screech owls would come and live in the box. We'd have red phase and also gray phase screech owls, and they'd sit with their little faces in the box. The challenge is to keep the squirrels out of the box. They're very aggressive and build their nests in there. But if you have a nest box like this, what I really need to do is put up a pole far enough away from the trees that the squirrels can't jump across and put a baffle on the pole so that the owls can get to the box, but the squirrels can't. And here's a trail cam video where we caught a bird at 1:30 in the morning. And when we slow it down, it's clearly a screech owl. I don't see any prey in his talons, but he was on the ground, probably going after something, and triggered the trail cam. The wood ducks do come by every spring and they look for nest cavities in the dead trees. We're far enough from the lake where they tend not to stay. They tend to try and find nest holes that are closer to the lake than we are. But it really is odd to see ducks 20 or 30 feet up in the trees, but that's what wood ducks do. And finally, hawks. We're going to finish up with hawks. We have Cooper's hawks in our yard. They certainly hunt small rodents, but they also hunt birds by the bird feeders. They fly by, but the birds see them coming, and most of the time they get away. Every once in a while they'll make a catch, but birds are pretty good at seeing them coming and avoiding them. Because we have thick woods behind the house, we see a lot of hawk, not a lot. Occasionally we see a hawk nest or we find it back in the woods. So here's the Cooper's hawk nest with the mother hawk in it. Here's the little white chick looking out over. A different nest, a different year. Here's the mother hawk yelling at me because I'm too close to her nest. Here's a couple of fledglings that are starting to move out of the nest and stretch their wings a little bit. That particular year, it was interesting that those fledgling hawks, as they were starting to fly around and learn how to hunt and forage, they used our swimming pool as a bird bath. And they would come and land on the edge of the swimming pool and they would jump down on that first step. It was just deep enough for them, too deep for other birds, and flutter around and take a really good bird bath before they flew away. They'd come every day at the same time. It was really fun to watch. Red-tailed hawks are the biggest hawks around here. The adults have a bright, rusty red tail and dark eyes. The juveniles tend to have yellowish eyes and their tail is still kind of banded, yellowish eyes. But they tend to have this faint band across their chest. And that's how you can tell it's a red-tailed hawk. So here, sorry, is the dead squirrel. I saw a flurry. I looked out the window. The hawk had landed on the squirrel. They go after squirrels a lot and rarely catch them, but every once in a while they're successful. This one had already subdued the squirrel and grabbed it in its talons and flew away. But here's the good news story for the squirrel, and I'm going to finish with this. I saw a flutter. I grabbed my camera. I just started firing. Saw this flurry of wings, and he's on the side of the bird feeder pole. Well, that was kind of weird. And as I watch, as he comes down a little bit, you can see he's got a hold of the squirrel's tail. The squirrel ran up inside the baffle. The hawk got his tail and the pole together at the same time. And he couldn't yank on the tail to get the squirrel out because he had a hold of the pole as well. So he hung there for a while, wondering what to do, looking around like, now what's going to happen? And finally, he loosened a little bit and the squirrel shot up inside the baffle. And so the hawk gave up and let go. And here you can see a tuft of fur that came out of the squirrel's tail. And the hawk jumped off and flew away. So in summary, if you want to see more wildlife in your yard, make it attractive for them. Provide shelter in the form of native plants, bushes and things, brush piles, log piles. Leave the dead trees up if they're not going to endanger your house. Let them live under your deck. They really don't cause a lot of harm. Provide native plants as food sources and shelter. The native plants attract native insects, which attract other wildlife. Make sure you have water sources, a pond in the ground, and bird baths. Consider a heated bird bath. And appreciate all the wildlife. Appreciate the insects and reptiles and amphibians, not just the charismatic mammals and birds. Be looking out your windows all the time. Set your desk up and chairs up so you can see out the windows. And consider getting a trail cam. You'll find a lot of stuff at night that you don't see during the day. That's all I got. Thank you for your attention.
Thanks, Steve. If you could end slide sharing, so it'll be, yeah.
Okay.
You and I on the screen. And we do have a few questions that came through. Yeah, I tried to kind of group these according to the order that you went through, but I'm not sure I got all of it right. So first off, I do want to tell you that you have lots and lots of compliments.
Thank you.
Both on your photos and videos and everything, and on your knowledge base. So thank you for that. And one of the more general questions that came through was about your trail cam and the videos that you get. Curious to know, and you may have mentioned this earlier on, but which trail cam?
So mine is a Browning, but it's like, what camera should you buy? You know, if you buy a Canon or a Nikon or Olympus or a Sony, you really can't go wrong. So there are many good ones out there. It's more you want to figure what features do you want and how much do you want to spend. So mine happens to be an 18 megapixel camera. You can get higher resolution, you can get lower resolution. I want to say I spent about $150 on it. You can spend more, you can spend less. Mine has a memory card and runs on 6 AA batteries. I use lithium batteries. I have 2 memory cards. I just swap them out almost every day to see what came by the night before.
Okay. And it was Browning.
Browning.
Okay, thank you very much. The same person also kind of said what suggestions for setup and use, any warnings, but I think you kind of covered most of that you just shared with us. We have someone who's wondering if you ever use deer repellents, like deer off on any of your plants. And either way, do you know if the repellents harm the deer or other critters?
So Patty certainly has used deer repellents on, like, we tried to have hostas. We just can't have hostas. Hostas are the deer's favorite. And she's pretty good at getting the deer repellent on them. It smells really stinky. I don't think it harms the deer. I don't think it's toxic. I just think it's offensive. Boy, you get it, wear old clothes when you apply it, because when you come in, you're going to reek yourself. But the problem is then it rains and it's gone, and you have to reapply it every single time it rains, and it takes a real commitment. And if you miss one time, that plant's going to be gone. So we just, for the most part, if the deer don't eat it, it can grow. If they eat it, well, we have deer.
Yeah, okay. Okay. Do you know, and I think this came up when we were looking at the weasel and the other things, are there otters that are native to northeastern Illinois?
The otters are coming back, and they're pretty well known along the Fox River. And we're only like a mile and a half from the Fox River. But they like the river system. They move up and down the river. I don't think they would come to a still lake. I don't know that there's if they came, I don't think they would stay. They might pass through, but it would be very uncommon. Best chance of an otter is along the river, I think.
Okay, where there's running water.
And again, they see you before you see them. So they're pretty wary. It's hard to see them. You'll find their footprints, you'll find their droppings before you see a live otter.
Okay. Do you know, you were talking about the foxes and their ability to sense magnetic north, which is fascinating. Do you know if they have the same sense of smell as other canines?
Well, I'm sure they do.
Okay.
I don't know if it's as well developed as a dog, but they certainly have very strong senses of smell.
Better than a human.
Yeah.
Yeah.
By multitudes.
Yes. Yeah. Somebody just threw in the chat that Brookfield Zoo has reintroduced otters and is tracking them. And there are some that are in Spring Creek.
Excellent.
So, good to know.
And that makes sense because they're in the Fox River, that they would come up Spring Creek, which enters into the Fox River.
Right.
We have other river species that travel up the river that we see occasionally on CFC property. Spring Creek runs through CFC property.
Okay.
Flint Creek, I'm sorry. That's
okay. And we have someone who just asked that I mention when skunks are digging for grubs, they are naturally aerating the lawn, so you don't need to use as many chemicals to kill the grubs. So,
and remember, when you apply insecticide, you kill all the insects.
Exactly.
They're not selective. You're killing the native insects, you're killing the butterflies, you're killing the good insects. We have people knock on our door saying, we're exterminators that, are working in the neighborhood, and we say, no, thanks.
Yeah, yeah. I will also, just from sad experience, insecticides are one of the things that can lead to bladder cancer in dogs. So, let me see where I am. We have someone who asked, actually, this was the very first question that came in, is how do I make my yard more attractive to the pond turtles so they stop going further afield and crossing roads?
That's a tough one. Turtles have a very acute sense of place. And for instance, when a turtle is crossing the road, it's common for people to want to rescue it so it doesn't get hit. So they pick it up and they look around and they don't see any water nearby. And they think, well, I know where a pond is. It's a better place. And they drive the turtle 5 miles and put it in a pond. That turtle knows exactly where it is and where it was and where it needs to be. And it will walk 5 miles back to get back to its original pond. And it will cross many roads on the way. So for a turtle crossing the road, you want to help it across the road in the direction it's heading, because if you put it back on the side it came from, it's just going to cross the road after you leave. But you want to leave it right where it is because it's going to come back. You don't want to move it to somewhere else. So I don't know that they like south-facing land because it gets more sunlight. They like a certain texture of soil. A certain amount of sand in the soil. We have a lot of clay. So if your soil isn't right, if you're south facing and temperatures aren't right, if it doesn't get enough sunlight during the day, it's not going to be right for the turtle. We know what we think is right, but we don't always know what the turtle thinks is right. So you can try to make it better, but it's kind of iffy whether the turtle will actually choose it.
Okay. I have a few people who are like, they have specific pictures or critters that they think they've seen. That they have photos. Is that something like, can someone write to CFC and ask you to identify?
Sure.
Specific? Okay. We have someone who is inquiring if you've ever seen a bobcat in the area.
I have not, and bobcat, and that's on my biggest wish list of things I hope my trail cam to catch. They've certainly been recorded in every county in Illinois. There certainly were photographs of a bobcat, no question about it, in Wakanda, which is pretty close by, in 2015. And I can tell you a story that it was just was it fall or spring, Patty? It was in the fall. We were outside looking at fireflies and enjoying them. And I went inside, and Patty stayed outside, and she heard this weird kind of noise and thought it was really unusual, just from the woods, back in our property. And she asked me what I thought it was. And I said, boy, I don't know. It doesn't sound like anything I've heard. And she started searching videos on YouTube, and she found one of a bobcat calling. And she said it absolutely sounded identical to what she heard in the woods back there. And she told Kathleen Leitner, who's the president of CFC, who lives on the other side of the lake from us. And Kathleen said, 2 nights ago, we heard a very similar noise. And Patty said, well, listen to this video. And Kathleen got back and said, it absolutely was that. So we might have had a bobcat passing through. Did it go in front of my trail cam? No, but they're uncommon, but yes, they could be here.
Okay, so it's possible this person saw one, right? We have someone who would like to have snakes in their yard, but has never seen any. They do have a very shady yard. Would a shady yard discourage snakes? Yep,
they like to bask. They like to bask in the sun, and they like to have cover, and they need a place to hibernate too. So having brush piles, having log piles will encourage things that snakes eat to live there. They need a food source.
Okay.
But yeah, they're not big fans of deep, dense, dark woods.
Okay. And
as evidenced by my neighbor with all the snakes in her basement, she lives near the fen where they forage during the summertime, and her house is a great place for them to hibernate. I live a block away, and she sees many times more snakes in her yard than I see in mine, a block away. I have too many woods.
Okay. And along with that, you said like you're currently hibernating them in your garage. What is the coldest temperature that the snakes can tolerate?
If they freeze, they die.
Okay.
So simple as that. So they can get down to the low 30s.
Okay. Okay. Then we have someone who asked, you spoke about the domestic cats being kept inside for their sake, that they won't get snatched by coyotes or owls. Shouldn't they also be kept inside to protect birds from them?
Oh, absolutely. Cats hunt every night. If your cat is outside, it's killing animals outside every night. I don't care how well fed it is. And they've put little, tiny cameras on their collars to document what they do. And they often kill 2, 3, 4 or more animals every night.
Okay.
And they kill rodents, and they kill birds, and they kill, reptiles and amphibians, and they kill bugs. Yeah, it's really tough. Think about a catio, like patio, only with a C. So you fence off an area the size of a patio that your cat can go out into, but then it can't run around the neighborhood, but it can get outside.
Okay. All right. We have a few questions about, we keep coming back to the cold. How are the robins surviving in the cold?
Boy, we've seen a lot of robins, and they're coming to our heated bird bath every single day. But as I look up, flocks of 50 of them are flying over. And they've chosen to overwinter. With global warming and warmer winters, they do overwinter. So they find berries, they find food sources, but they're certainly surviving, because here it is, end of February, we still have large numbers of healthy robins.
Okay. And I think you might have touched on this in your, a few minutes after this question came through to me, anything in particular that attracts red-headed woodpeckers. And I think you said they like dead trees.
So when we go on our bird walks, we find stands of dead trees, like an area that's flooded and all the trees in that area are dead. So they're like 30 or 50 dead trees in a stand. That's where we find the red-headed woodpeckers.
Okay. And then a bunch
and they need food sources, insects and, nuts and things like that.
Okay. And there are a few things that came through that I have not been able to transcribe into this. So let me just, several questions about the small pond that you showed us. I at the beginning.
Right,
So, and again, I think you may have covered some of these things. So you keep the mosquitoes down by putting minnows
right.
in, and gather duckweed from nearby.
A pond that's a block away,
Okay, okay, so just take a small amount.
and maybe some, native pond plants from a block away.
Okay, or from the CFC sale.
Yep.
Okay.
And some people get elaborate and they get pumps and filters and they plant lily pads and things like that. But that's more maintenance. Then I've got to maintain that pump and filter, and I've got to, shut it down for the winter time and make sure that things don't freeze. Every spring when it thaws, I scoop it out and clean it up a little bit and fill it up with clean water, and it's good to go.
Okay.
Sometimes I'll get a bucket from the local pond that has microbes in it just to kind of seed it with little creepy crawlies that help maintain a bioactive system.
Okay. A few people who are talking about bobcats. Someone in Woodstock, naturalist identified footprints that they found as belonging to a bobcat.
I wouldn't doubt it.
Yeah. There are a few things about bald eagles in the area, and I think a lot of those are along the Fox River.
Right, so bald eagles need to hunt all winter long, and they will overwinter here. And because the Fox River is flowing, they're areas that never freeze completely. And the eagles will hunt fish in the unfrozen areas, but they'll hunt ducks as well that are staying in the unfrozen areas. Okay. And there is an eagle nest at Fox River Marina between, just a little bit south of Island Lake, right on the Fox River. You can hike back and see that. They have chicks in the spring, and it's an area that people can't get to. It's on the far side of the river with, no roads. So you can see them from a long distance away, but you can see them. Okay.
And of course, everything is different this year, but I know in past years, the library in Elgin, the Gail Borden Library, it sits right on the Fox River and has a balcony, large balcony outside. And you could actually go to the library, borrow binoculars to use while you were there. And they had a few bald eagles. There's a small island out in the middle of the river there. So
another place is the Carpentersville Dam on the Fox River is a place where eagles tend to congregate because it doesn't freeze.
Yeah. Let's see. And then a lot of mosquito questions, and kind of along with that about bats. How can you attract bats?
Well, they certainly make bat houses, and you can put bat houses up. We had a bat house up for 25 years and we never had bat one.
Okay.
The bats know where they want to go. Sometimes they end up in people's attics and behind their shutters and things like that, but they find areas. So some of the forest preserves have large bat houses that attract bats that they come to every year. But I don't know that I have a good answer for that. You certainly can put up bat houses. I've heard that if you put bat guano that might be commercially available near the bat house, that might attract them. We never had any success.
Okay, all right. Mosquito dunks that are safe for a small bird bath. Yes, no?
I have no experience with those. If it's putting a layer of oil on it, if it's any kind of chemical, I'd be a little nervous.
Okay, and along the same
we
line,
clean our bird baths daily or almost every other day,
okay.
Which is certainly going to keep mosquitoes down out of the bird baths. But we find the birds poop in the bird baths, and just to keep them clean, they do require some maintenance.
Okay. Right. And along the same lines, your swimming pool, like you had the photo of the birds going into your pool. Is that safe for them? Do you use chlorine in your pool, or do you use something else?
I do use chlorine in the pool. I don't think it's great for drinking. I also don't think they were drinking large amounts of it. Okay. They come and flutter with their feathers and jump off and dry off. I didn't see them, sticking their head in and taking a drink like they do from the bird baths. I assume it tastes bad.
Yeah, I would think so. Tastes bad to me. So. And
that was one time in all those years. They liked our pool for some reason. Actually, we've been using a pool cover lately, so it's not like it's open for them to use all the time.
Okay. Right. those are most of, oh, I'm sorry. We have someone who talks about a pair of ducks coming to a small pond they have on their property and then leaving at the beginning of summer, but they come back every year. Is that common behavior for ducks?
Probably mallards, and yes, we have mallards that come to our vernal pond in the front, and then they walk all around. They come under the bird feeder sometimes, then they just waddle through the yard. Sometimes they land in the swimming pool and swim around.
Yeah.
One time we found a duck nest in the woods, just 20 feet in behind our house, and then some predator found them at night. I don't think mallards are real smart, but on the other hand, they're really successful. Look how many of them
Right.
there are.
Yeah.
So a lot of them are making babies.
Okay. Yeah. And actually that question, the ducks are coming to their pool, not to a pond on their property. I misread it. So same thing. And then we have, and I think this will be our last question, the specifics that people asked about with photos. I will make sure that Steve has a copy of the questions that came in chat and, see if he can address those based on the information you've given. So,
Okay.
so we'll post that along with the video. And then we have a question about, I'm sorry, two more questions. We'll go to the bird one first. And I know a few things, like you said, for Baltimore Orioles, use the orange slices and grape jelly, things like that. Do you have recommendations for what to put in bird feeders?
Gosh, I'm certainly not an expert, and there's certainly, I bet a lot of the people that are listening right now know a lot more about it than I do.
Okay.
Certain kinds of bird food I know can attract birds you don't want, like starlings that come and empty your bird feeder. We tend to use the black oil sunflower seeds, and then we have just a regular seed mix in the other one. We used to get surplus nuts from the Fisher Nut Supply in Elgin, and they had a 30-pound bag for like $15, and it would be whatever was left over from their nuts. And we put those in one bird feeder, and that attracted, things like crows and some of the other birds. But this year with the pandemic, they didn't have them available.
Okay. All right.
And we put suet out. Boy, the birds like suet. The woodpeckers like suet. If you like woodpeckers, put out some suet.
Okay.
The squirrels like suet too. And if you get the hot pepper suet, then the squirrels tend to leave that one alone, and the birds still like it.
Okay, that's great. And then somebody asking about gray foxes. Have you seen them at your place? They used to have one or two in their woods. And that's actually,
there are color variations in the red fox, and some of them can be, some individuals can be a little darker than others, like some squirrels can be black. The actual gray fox is a separate species, and it's a regional thing. I know they're common out west. I don't believe that the true gray foxes are native to the Barrington area or the Chicago area.
okay. All right. Oh, and Peggy tells us that the National Wildlife Organization has lists of which seeds for which birds.
Excellent. Thank you, Peggy.
Yes. And the person who asked the question about the gray foxes is Wendy Paulson. So she's fairly confident that they are in fact gray foxes. So,
Okay. Yes. Wendy knows what she's talking about. So yes.
okay.
I'll have to look into that. I don't know about gray foxes in this area.
Okay. I know I keep saying just one last question, but they keep coming in. Do you ever intervene when you find diseased wildlife in the area as a veterinarian?
It's often challenging to capture something that's sick or injured. Like we see a sick or injured deer, you can't get within 100 yards of it. So what can you do? It can be tough. We did find a hognose snake in Wisconsin last summer that had a horrible wound behind its head, where ribs were exposed and muscles were exposed, and it was all contaminated with dirt. We brought that snake back to our animal hospital and cleaned it all up and sutured it all up and treated it with antibiotics and pain medication. We kept it for a month until we took the stitches out, until everything was healed, and we took it back and let it go right where we found it. I think there's no way it would have survived if we hadn't intervened, and I think we gave it a really good chance.
Okay, great.
So if we can, but usually you can't get your hands on something that's sick or injured. Usually it's really hard to capture.
Right.
Of course, Dawn at Flint Creek Wildlife, wildlife rehabilitation. She does a lot with sick and injured animals. And when people are able to capture them, or she's able to capture them, she nurses them back to health and rehabilitates them and lets them go when they can. She does an amazing job. And if you're looking for some place to donate, Flint Creek Wildlife or Citizens for Conservation are a couple of really good causes.
Okay. And yeah, if you're curious to learn more about Flint Creek Wildlife, I know we link to their site from our list of, community organizations at the library, but you can also just Google Flint Creek Wildlife. Offhand, do you know how long they've been around? Because it's been decades.
Decades, yeah.
Yeah.
Decades, 15 or 20 or 25 years.
Yeah, okay. I think we will stop with most of the questions there and share any other information from the chat on the recording, which it'll take a day or two to get the recording up. It takes time for it to save and it takes time for it to render. I'm going to do one last completely, but because two people said something about it in the chat, move my head the right way. The pictures behind me are from the 2017 total solar eclipse. These were taken in Tennessee, not by someone I know, but it happened to be near to where I went to watch the eclipse. I actually purchased them at the Art in the Barn art sale a few years ago. So thank you for the compliments. I am completely enamored of them. They make me smile every time I see them. So thank you. Thank you very much, Steve, for being with us. And
you're welcome. Thanks for listening.
Yeah, thanks Citizens for Conservation for working on this with us. And I will send an email to everyone who is on the registration list when the video is ready, if you need to go back and catch a part that you may have missed, whatever it may have been. And of course, it will remain on the library's website, and Citizens for Conservation will have it on their website under their education tab. Peggy, give me yeah, that's correct. Okay. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for being with us. We do have someone who's asking, sorry, it just came up on someone who's asking how to become a member of CFC. Peggy, I can let you unmute if you'd like to speak to that, or Steve.
Yes, on the CFC website, right at the top, there's a button that says become a member or join or something like that. It's a really easy process. So yes, thanks for asking.
Absolutely. And I know you also use volunteers. You can go to the volunteer.thebavc.org to find volunteer opportunities.
Yeah. And CFC uses lots and lots of volunteers.
Yeah, great way to learn. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for being with us. And
thank you.
Look forward to seeing you next month for stormwater management. Take care.
Bye.
Thank you, Steve.